Rain hammered the hood. Then, the shout. The slam of a door. The glint of a drawn weapon. Hands where I can see them. Ava didn't move. The soldier in her measured the distance, the threat, the angle. The war she'd left overseas had just followed her home. The cruiser's headlights burned through the downpour. White and merciless. Water streamed down her windshield, blurring the officer's shape into a specter, all bulk and motion. The outline of authority wrapped in neon rain. Her wipers scraped once, twice, and stopped mid-arc. Ava's breath came slow and steady. She could hear her pulse in her ears, the rhythm syncing with the rain. When she finally lifted her hands, the motion was deliberate. Slow enough to calm a trigger finger, fast enough to assert control. Step out of the vehicle. The voice was male, tight, impatient. Boots splashed closer. The red-blue strobes ricocheted off the slick pavement, carving the night into alternating slices of accusation and innocence. She pushed open the door, the hinge creaking against the rain. The air outside hit cold and chemical, the smell of wet asphalt and adrenaline. She stepped out, posture straight, shoulders squared, not defiance, just habit. Turn around. Officer, she said, her tone low, even. What's this about? You were speeding and failed to signal a lane change. The lie was too clean. Rehearsed. She turned anyway. The water ran down her neck and soaked the back of her shirt. Behind her, she heard the scrape of his holster, the faint click of his bodycam beginning to record. Hands on the roof, Ava placed her palms flat against the metal. The car vibrated faintly from the idling engine, humming beneath her touch. She could feel every rivulet of rain coursing down the panels, every tremor of her own restraint. He started the search. The beam of his flashlight swept her sides, her legs, her waist, an impersonal violation disguised as procedure. She felt the light linger, then move. ID, in the car, she said quietly. Wallets in the glove compartment, stay still. He reached past her into the open door. She heard the shuffle of paper, the rattle of her duffel on the passenger seat. Inside that duffel-folded uniform, ID tags. The insignia that could end this in a second. But that was not how she operated. Not anymore. The officer held his name stitched in black over his chest, pulled out her license and scanned it under the beam. Lieutenant Commander Ava Sinclair, he read aloud, almost mocking the title. His tone shifted, skepticism curdling into challenge. Military? Huh. Yes, active. She didn't answer. Halden stepped around her, his flashlight cutting through the rain like a blade. You think that means something out here? Ava turned her head slightly, enough for him to see her profile. No, officer. Just means, I've seen worse. For a second, he froze. The rain filled the silence between them, hard and relentless. Then he smirked, a nervous twitch disguised as power. Let's see about that. He gestured toward the cruiser. Walk to the front of my vehicle. Ava obeyed, her boots splashing through shallow puddles. The cruiser's dashcam light blinked red. Another witness, blind but permanent, faced the car. She turned, the blinding light bleaching her features. Her hair clung to her forehead, eyes narrowed against the glare. Halden circled, tension radiating off him like static. You live around here? Yes. Doing what, exactly? Classified. That word landed like a small detonation. Halden's jaw flexed. Don't play games with me. I'm not. You think you can? Just the radio on his shoulder crackled. A burst of static, a dispatch. He didn't answer. He muted it with a twitch of his thumb. The gesture, practiced, irritated, told her what she needed to know. This wasn't about a violation. This was about control. The silence between them stretched again, filled only by rain and the faint hum of highway beyond the overpass. Then, abruptly, he stepped closer. Too close. His hand brushed her shoulder. Ava's body reacted before thought, muscles coiled, instincts flashing through her like current. In a single trained motion, she shifted her weight, half turning without aggression, redirecting rather than resisting. The movement made him stumble half a step. His flashlight hit the pavement with a metallic clatter. Instantly, the sound changed everything. Don't move. Halden barked, voice cracking with the sudden edge of panic. His hand flew to his belt again. Back up. Ava froze where she was, both palms raised now, eyes steady. Her voice was calm, too calm. You dropped your light. He stared at her, breath fogging in the cold air, veins rising on his neck. The rain poured harder, bouncing off the hood, the road. His badge. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of water and the electric hum of the cruiser dot. Then Halden bent, snatched the flashlight, and pointed it back at her, as if it were a weapon itself. Get in your car, he ordered. Now, she didn't move until she was sure his hands were both visible. Then she turned, climbed into the driver's seat, and shut the door without slamming it. The wipers came alive again, cutting rhythmic arcs through the rain. Halden lingered outside, muttering something into his radio she couldn't hear over the storm. The bodycam blinked on his chest, red and mechanical, capturing nothing of what truly happened. He stood there another 30 seconds before stepping back to his cruiser. The siren lights dimmed, the rain softened to a drizzle. Ava sat behind the wheel, motionless, watching the blur of color fade in her mirrors. Her pulse slowed. She flexed her fingers once, twice, as though confirming she still owned her body. When she finally pulled back onto the road, her headlights cut a clean path through the mist. The city lights glimmered faintly ahead, indifferent dot in the reflection of her rearview mirror. The last red flash from the cruiser pulsed like a heartbeat, one that didn't belong to her. But to the system that had just marked her, she exhaled. Long and controlled, somewhere deep in her, a switch had flipped, not of fear, but of calculation. The night swallowed her again. The precinct was quiet at this hour, that peculiar stillness that comes when the city outside hasn't yet decided if it's sleeping or simply exhausted. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, bleaching the walls to a lifeless white. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and wet fabric. The scent of men who had been out in the rain, now drying under electric light. Officer Mark Halden sat at a desk near the back, the glow of his monitor washing his face in pale blue. The cursor blinked, patient and expectant. On an empty report form, he flexed his fingers once, cracked his knuckles, and began to type. Subject appeared non-compliant during routine traffic stop. Subject refused commands. Subject attempted to interfere with officer during lawful search. He paused, reading the words as they appeared, then leaned back. The sentences felt stiff, not false, exactly, but unfinished. They lacked the rhythm of truth the department liked to hear. He had learned that rhythm long ago, the careful modulation of language that turned friction into threat, resistance into aggression, silence into guilt. The cursor blinked again. He deleted appeared non-compliant and replaced it with became agitated. Then, after a moment, changed it again, displayed aggressive body language. There better, behind him. The precinct's old HVAC unit rattled, blowing recycled air across the room. Somewhere down the hall a phone rang once, then stopped. The building was never fully silent. It just cycled through small noises that reminded everyone of its vigilance. Halden took a sip of coffee that had long gone cold. The taste was bitter metal. He stared at the screen, tapping the backspace key with short, irritated bursts. Officer initiated stop due to moving violation. Subject's demeanor escalated during standard questioning. He paused again, rubbing his temple. The rain had followed him here. He could still feel it in his clothes, a damp cold that refused to leave. His reflection in the monitor looked older than he remembered. He thought of the woman, Ava Sinclair, the name on the license. Her calmness had unnerved him, the stillness in her eyes like something trained, deliberate. It wasn't defiance. It was worse than that, control. He had met arrogance before. It always came loud, impatient. This was different. This was silence used as a weapon. He began typing faster now, as if speed could clarify memory. When asked to exit the vehicle, subject delayed compliance and displayed threatening posture. The phrasing sounded right, formal, but safe. He had used it before. The department's template for conflict was reliable. It had been written by men who understood that ambiguity protects best. He saved the file, then reopened it immediately. Officer perceived imminent danger due to subject's sudden movement. He added that the line was practically policy now, a mantra of justification, simple and unassailable. His pen, a standard issue black ballpoint with the precinct emblem fading on the clip, scratched across a notepad beside the keyboard. Small details he might forget later, weather, time, badge number, of backup unit. The sound of the pen against paper filled the room, an analog rhythm under the digital glow. He stopped to roll his shoulders. The tension sat heavy between his shoulder blades, a familiar ache after confrontation. Across the bullpen, another officer, Ramirez, leaned back in his chair and muttered something into his phone. Laughter, low and careless. Halden ignored it. His world had shrunk to this small square of light on his desk, this blinking witness. He scrolled through the bodycam upload queue. The video would take hours to process, but he already knew what it would show. Rain, confusion, fragments of light and shadow. Context washed away by glare, and his voice, steady, professional, commanding. He would make sure of that. He rewound in his mind the moment she turned, the precision of it, the way her hand brushed his wrist without aggression, but with authority, a trained move, something he couldn't name but recognized instinctively as control. He hadn't meant to pull the flashlight so fast. He hadn't meant for his voice to crack, but cameras didn't care about intent. Cameras saw weakness as guilt, so he wrote again. Subject made physical contact with officer during lawful procedure. Contact interpreted as interference. He read the line 3 times, testing its weight. It sat neatly within departmental vocabulary, not too sharp, not too soft. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence like a heartbeat. He hesitated, then added one more line. No further escalation occurred due to officer restraint. That one he liked. It gave him control. It painted calmness as virtue instead of relief. He leaned back, exhaling. The hum of the fluorescent light above him deepened, a low electric note that seemed to measure the pace of his thoughts. On the wall opposite, a bulletin board held a dozen commendations, faded press clippings, and a motto in plastic lettering: integrity, service, accountability. The first and last letters had peeled slightly. The word service stood out in the middle, unblemished. Halden looked at it too long. Then he returned to the screen. He adjusted a few timestamps, aligning his memory to the department's expected narrative. A minute removed here, a phrase tightened there. Each edit smoothed the edges of truth. He signed the report electronically. Officer M. Halden, number 3742. Filed 2314 hours. The file name appeared in the queue, among dozens of others, indistinguishable. He clicked submit. The confirmation window blinked once, then disappeared. For a moment, he didn't move. The monitor's reflection shimmered faintly in his eyes. The cursor frozen now, at the end of the report. The room had no sound except the soft, endless hum. He reached for the coffee again, but his hand stopped halfway. His fingers hovered, trembling just slightly. He switched off the monitor instead. The room dimmed, collapsing into shadow, except for the exit light glowing above the door. Sterile green. He sat there a while, staring at the empty screen. The absence of the blinking cursor felt heavier than the words it had created. Down the hallway, the printer started up, spitting out pages somewhere unseen. The sound of paper feeding into permanence. By morning, his report would be part of a file. By the end of the week, that file would become a statistic. And by the next shift, the system would have already forgotten the rain. Morning came without warmth. The sky outside Ava Sinclair's apartment was a pale, bruised gray, the kind of color that swallowed sound and left everything heavy. She sat at the small wooden table by the window, the letter in front of her. The paper trembled slightly from the draft, sneaking through the old pane. Notice of criminal charge. The header was printed in government blue. Below it, resisting arrest, assaulting a law enforcement officer. 2 lines. That was all it took to dismantle a reputation. A life's worth of precision and restraint. The envelope still lay torn on the counter beside her keys. She hadn't read the letter twice. There was no need. Each word was a weapon, sharpened by procedure, resisting, assaulting, chosen not for truth, but for endurance. The system's language always outlasted fact. She reached for her coffee, found it cold, and left it untouched. Her eyes moved slowly around the apartment, as if reacquainting herself with a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. The space was modest, functional, not decorated. A single bookshelf lined with strategy manuals, operational histories, and a few worn paperbacks. A framed commendation from her commanding officer. A photograph of her unit, their faces half-lit by desert dawn. And above her desk, in perfect alignment, a folded flag. She had carried that flag home herself, tucked against her chest as the plane lifted from Kandahar, pressed to her ribs through turbulence and silence. For her, it wasn't symbol, it was oath. Now, it watched her like an accusation. She read the charge again, the words blurring slightly at the edges. Her pulse didn't quicken. She had trained her body too long to betray her thoughts. Stillness was discipline. Silence was armor. The knock on her door broke it. 3 firm raps. Ava didn't move at first. She knew the rhythm, practiced, procedural. She stood slowly, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, and looked through the peephole. A uniformed courier. Civilian, not police. She opened the door halfway. Lieutenant Commander Ava Sinclair. Yes, ma'am, I need a signature for receipt. He handed her a clipboard, his tone mechanical. She signed, returned it. He gave a quick nod, professional but avoiding eye contact, and left down the corridor. His shoes squeaking against the tile, Ava closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, the silence pressing in again. She could hear the muted hum of traffic outside, the faint murmur of a neighbor's television through the wall. Ordinary sounds. Indifferent sounds. On the table, the letter lay open beside the folded flag, 2 forms of allegiance. One earned, one demanded. She stared at them both. Her phone vibrated once. A text from an unknown number. Call me. We can help. A link followed Legal Defense Fund Advocacy Hotline. Automated concern. She deleted it. Help, she thought, was never clean. Ava walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside were her Navy ID, her insignia, and a photograph, her father in his own uniform, younger, proud. The same posture. The same belief that service meant something unassailable. She closed the drawer softly. The anger wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It moved inside her like current, invisible but charged. She had seen rage destroy men overseas, strip them of clarity. What she felt was colder, sharper, a kind of still-burning logic. She folded the letter once, deliberately, and slid it beneath the edge of the flag. Outside, rain began again, light this time, tapping gently against the glass. The sound was almost identical to the night she'd been stopped. She let it fill the room. She sat again, hands flat on the table, palms cool against the wood. There was no panic. No disbelief. Only the quiet recognition of pattern. She'd spent enough time inside the machinery of command to know how systems defend themselves, how language is their weapon, and silence their shield. They would call it a misunderstanding, then a matter under review, then, if she didn't fight, a closed case. The truth would dissolve in paperwork. She looked again at the folded uniform on the chair beside her, still damp from the rain that night. Sleeves pressed, but not yet stored. The insignia caught the light through the thin curtains, glinting once, then fading. That uniform had once been her protection, the difference between suspicion and respect. But now, stripped of context, it meant nothing to the world beyond these walls. Out there, she was just another figure in the rain. Her silence misread as defiance, her calm mistaken for guilt. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a name appeared, Dana Ruiz, her appointed defense counsel. Ava let it ring out. She would call later, when she had decided how much of herself to reveal. She stood, moved toward the window, and looked down at the street below. Commuters hurried under umbrellas, anonymous in their movement. A police cruiser rolled slowly past, its lights off, but presence unmistakable. Ava's reflection in the glass looked detached, almost translucent, the ghost of her own authority. Her mind replayed the night, frame by frame. The rain, the shout, the weapon, the trembling beam of the flashlight. She had filed it away in memory with the same discipline she used to process combat. Separate the facts from emotion, record everything, feel nothing. But even now, she could feel the smallest tremor in her jaw. Not fear, containment. The truth was simple, unadorned. She hadn't raised a hand. She hadn't spoken above a whisper. And yet, here it was, her name converted into a file. Her silence translated into offense. She sat again, opened a blank notepad, and began to write. Not a statement, not yet. Just fragments, dates, details, weather, sequence. She knew that the first report always won. The second had to be perfect to survive. Each line she wrote was precise, her handwriting unshaken. 10:47 p.m., vehicles stopped. Rain moderate. Officer identified as Halden. She listed every movement, every command, every word exchanged. No emotion, no commentary, only data. The same discipline that had kept her alive now turned toward defense. When she was done, she tore the page carefully from the pad and folded it once. She placed it beneath the flag, beside the letter. Truth, beside accusation. Service beside system. For a moment, she simply watched the paper edges align. The light outside shifted the color of early afternoon steel. She hadn't eaten, hadn't noticed. Hunger had become a distant thing. The room hummed with quiet, the refrigerator, the ticking wall clock, the soft, steady drip from the leaking faucet. Ordinary sounds, almost human in their persistence. Ava rose finally, walked to the uniform on the chair, and folded it again. Perfect corners, crisp edges, precision as ritual. She set it down gently, and sat beside it, back straight, hands resting on her knees. No calls, no panic, just stillness, heavy, deliberate, unbroken. Her silence filled the room like oxygen. It was not surrender. It was the first act of war. Morning light entered the courthouse in cold squares, pale beams fractured by the frosted glass of bureaucratic design. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of toner and old paper. The sound of 1,000 small decisions being made without conscience. Printers, word, shoes clicked against tile. The building moved like a machine breathing through its circuits of routine. At the end of the corridor, in a fluorescent-lit office lined with metal filing cabinets, Officer Mark Halden stood waiting. His uniform looked sharper today, pressed, badge gleaming, bodycam replaced with a fresh unit. His posture was straight, but his jaw worked quietly. Chewing an invisible thought, across the room, a clerk stamped documents with mechanical rhythm. Each strike of the rubber seal echoed official, irreversible. Stamped paper slid into neat stacks, forming layers of legitimacy that no one would question later. Every page added to the system's armor. On one desk, a printer spat out the title page of a new report, Commonwealth v. Sinclair. Ava M. The name looked clinical on the white paper, as if it belonged to a statistic, not a person. A ceiling clock ticked overhead. Its hands moved with indifferent precision, a silent witness marking the pace of injustice. The prosecutor's door opened. Officer Halden, said a voice, calm and measured. Come in. Assistant District Attorney Marla Kesner was already seated when he entered. Her desk was immaculate, files arranged by color-coded tabs, pens aligned, a single steaming mug of black coffee at her right hand. The blinds behind her cut the morning light into rigid bands that striped the room like cell bars. Halden stepped forward. Ma'am? Sit down, she said, without looking up from the screen. Her voice carried the practiced detachment of someone who had long ago learned to treat people as cases. He sat. His hands rested on his knees, fingers interlaced. Kesner scrolled through his report, eyes flicking over the lines with professional efficiency. Her tone was neutral, but each pause was deliberate. You wrote, she appeared. Agitated. Yes, ma'am. Did she resist verbally? Not exactly. She didn't respond. Looked at me. Didn't answer commands right away. Non-compliance, Kesner said softly, typing the word without hesitation. The keys clacked crisply, punctuation like small verdicts. Halden nodded. Yes, I'd say that fits. Any witnesses? None close enough to hear. Her eyes flicked up for the first time, assessing. Bodycam footage was partially obstructed. Rain hit the lens. Kesner's expression didn't change. Of course. She resumed typing. Then the narrative holds. He shifted slightly in his chair. I did follow procedure. Full identification, verbal commands. She didn't comply. When I moved to detain, she tensed and pulled back, which is, Kessner said, technically, resisting arrest. Exactly. Silence settled between them, a silence of paperwork and self-preservation. Somewhere beyond the walls, a copier began to hum, spitting out copies of a truth rephrased. Kessner reached for her mug, took a measured sip, then spoke as if reading from memory. This is a small case, officer. One of many. It'll go through the motions. Just keep your statements consistent, avoid unnecessary commentary, and the department will back you. Her tone wasn't unkind, only efficient. Halden nodded again. Yes, ma'am. Good. Write the supplemental today, make sure it reflects perceived threat. That phrase matters. Perceived threat. It protects both of us. He looked down at his gloves, resting in his lap. The phrase echoed in his head like a commandment. Perceived threat. It sounded neutral, procedural, but he knew its weight. It was the system's favorite ghost, invisible, always believable. Kessner closed the file. Thank you, officer. I'll handle it from here. He stood, saluted faintly, and left the room. Outside, the corridor seemed longer than before. The ticking clock at the end of the hall sounded louder now, each tick a metronome of inevitability. He passed by the records department. Inside, clerks fed sheets through scanners, the green light crawling methodically over each page. Folders were labeled, archived, stacked in gray cabinets. The life cycle of evidence, embalmed in bureaucracy. The hum of the courthouse was steady, unbroken. Doors opened and closed with muted finality. A bailiff walked past, carrying a tray of forms. Two officers laughed quietly by the vending machine. Nothing here looked sinister, and that was the point. Legitimacy wore a smile and a badge. By noon, Ava Sinclair's name existed in half a dozen databases, referenced in internal memos, logged as case number 221946B. Her story was now a file that could be moved, copied, redacted. Halden found himself in the lobby, standing before the metal detector as civilians passed through, their pockets emptied into plastic trays, their belongings scanned. Each object, a phone, a pen, a belt buckle reduced to potential threat until proven harmless. He watched a woman struggle with a stroller at the checkpoint. The officer assisting her smiled gently, guiding her through. It was the same tone Halden had used countless times, firm but polite, he wondered. For the briefest second, if he'd used that tone with Sinclair, the thought unsettled him, so he dismissed it. The report was done. The system was in motion. His words had become record, immutable once filed. He left the building without looking back. Inside, the machine continued. A clerk stapled another packet. A printer beeped. The clock ticked. Each sound folded neatly into the courthouse's rhythm. The quiet symphony of institutional order. Upstairs, Kessner sat at her desk reviewing the final version of the charge sheet. She adjusted one sentence. Subject exhibited behavior consistent with potential threat to officer safety. She read it once more, nodded slightly, and pressed print. The page slid out, warm, clean, authoritative. She placed it atop the growing stack and tapped it into alignment. Through the narrow blinds, sunlight flickered on the courthouse steps where pigeons gathered undisturbed. Down below, the city moved on, unaware that another life had already been translated into paper. The file was complete. The narrative sealed. And as the clock on the wall marked another passing second, the system, efficient, indifferent, and immovable, prepared itself to call that justice. The courtroom was colder than it needed to be. The air conditioner hummed with bureaucratic efficiency, its low whine filling the pauses that the people would not. Rows of polished benches gleamed under fluorescent light. Wood so meticulously varnished it reflected faces like a warning. Lieutenant Commander Ava Sinclair stood at the defense table in civilian clothes. Dark slacks, plain white blouse, hair pulled tight. Her posture was unmistakably military, chin parallel to the floor, shoulders squared, gaze steady. She didn't fidget. She didn't blink more than necessary. It was the posture of someone who'd stood in heat, in noise, in chaos, and learned that stillness could be power. Across the room, Officer Mark Halden adjusted his collar. His uniform looked impeccable, every fold rehearsed. He was seated near the prosecutor's table, hands folded, eyes focused forward. The badge on his chest caught the overhead light in rhythmic flashes, a pulsing mirror to his steady breathing dot at the bench. Judge Byron Cale entered without ceremony. His robe swayed slightly as he took his seat, glasses sliding down his nose. The flag behind him hung heavy and immaculate, the fabric too stiff to move, its colors almost too vivid. It was a backdrop, a prop of virtue, patriotism staged for the public theater of justice. All rise. The room obeyed. The scrape of chairs echoed like synchronized compliance. Ava rose to. Her movement was precise, practiced, automatic. The reflex of command now repurposed for defense. You may be seated. The shuffle resumed. The judge scanned the file before him without interest. Case number 22-1946B, Commonwealth vs. Ava M. Sinclair. His tone carried no inflection, no curiosity. It was the cadence of repetition. Another name, another docket, another performance. The prosecutor, Marla Kesner, stood. Her navy suit was tailored, her voice smooth. Your Honor, the Commonwealth charges the defendant with resisting arrest and assaulting a law enforcement officer. The evidence will show that Officer Halden conducted a lawful stop and was met with aggression and non-compliance. Each word landed neatly, polished, procedural, empty. Ava sat motionless, her eyes fixed not on but on the small brass seal mounted above the bench. E pluribus unam, its edges dulled by years of polish. She had sworn to that seal once, under another flag, in a uniform that meant something different. Kesner continued. The officer acted within his authority. His restraint prevented escalation. We will present his bodycam footage, his written report, and his sworn testimony. Judge Cale nodded. Proceed. Halden took the stand. He moved with the stiffness of someone who had rehearsed every step. The bailiff administered the oath, right hand raised, palm steady, and Halden's voice barely wavered as he said, I do. Kesner approached. Officer Halden, please describe the events of October 14th. Yes, ma'am. I initiated a traffic stop on a vehicle traveling above the posted speed limit. Upon approach, I observed the driver, later identified as Ms. Ava Sinclair, appear tense and unresponsive to my verbal commands. Unresponsive, Kesner repeated, her tone calibrated to precision. Yes. She avoided eye contact and failed to present identification when requested. When I attempted to detain her for officer safety, she resisted. Describe the resistance. Halden hesitated only a second. She pulled her arm away. Stepped back. Her posture suggested potential aggression. Potential, Kesner echoed, glancing toward the judge. Would you say you felt threatened? I did. Silence. A perfect silence. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to recede. Ava watched him without blinking. Her expression remained unreadable. Not disbelief, not outrage, just the quiet recognition of a man shaping a story into a shield. Kesner nodded. No further questions. The judge turned. Defense. Ava's counsel, Dana Ruiz, stood slowly. She was young, competent, but cautious. One of those attorneys who understood that the courtroom was as much choreography as law. Her voice was measured. Officer Halden, you said the defendant appeared tense. Would you consider that an unusual reaction for a lone woman stopped at night by an armed officer? Halden straightened slightly. Ma'am, I can't speculate on her feelings. Ruiz's tone sharpened. You can, however, speculate on potential aggression. The pause that followed was brief, but it hung heavy. Halden's eyes flickered toward Kesner, then back to Ruiz. My assessment was based on training and observation. Ruiz nodded once. training that teaches perception as justification. Objection, Kesner said, calm as stone. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge replied without looking up. The rhythm of the hearing resumed, a pendulum of procedure swinging toward inevitability. Ruiz sighed quietly and stepped back. No further questions. Halden exhaled as if freed. He descended from the stand, the badge on his chest catching light once more. He avoided Ava's gaze, but she never looked away. The judge turned a page, the sound crisp as breaking ice. The court acknowledges testimony. Next item. Ruiz began to speak something about bodycam footage, the poor visibility, the distortion of rain. The judge listened with the indifference of a man checking boxes. When the footage played, the screen flickered with washed-out light, headlights, raindrops, the shimmer of wet asphalt. The lens blurred the scene into abstraction movement, without clarity. On the recording, Ava's silhouette was visible only for a second, motionless, calm. Then the audio spiked, Halden's voice commanding, echoing, dominant. Hands where I can see them. No violence. No aggression. Only static, rain, and silence. When the footage ended, no one spoke for several beats. The judge scribbled something, maybe a note, maybe a grocery list. Kesner broke the quiet first. Your Honor, the footage corroborates the officer's account. The defendant's lack of compliance clearly visible. Ruiz didn't respond. She just exhaled through her nose and closed her folder. Ava remained still. The entire proceeding felt like a well-rehearsed play she'd been cast into without consent. Each role performed perfectly. The prosecutor's moral clarity, the officer's calm authority, the judge's procedural detachment. Only she existed outside the script. Her silence the single unscripted act. The flag behind the judge shifted slightly in the vent's current. Just enough to move the shadow on the wall, red, white, blue flickering like an artificial flame. When the judge finally spoke, his words were almost merciful in their flatness. The court will set a further hearing for disposition. Defendant released on Next case. The gavel struck once. Sound returned to the room, papers shuffling, murmurs resuming, the scrape of benches as people stood. The moment dissolved into the next like water into oil. Ava rose last. She looked briefly at the flag again, then at Halden, who was speaking quietly to Kesner by the door. He laughed once, softly, as if something had been confirmed. Her attorney touched her arm lightly. We'll appeal, Ruiz said. It's not over. Ava nodded. The words didn't comfort her. They didn't anger her either. They simply joined the chorus of things said by people who still believed the system could hear them. She walked out of the courtroom with her head high. The sound of her steps deliberate and even echoing against the polished floor like a drumbeat of restraint. Outside, the corridor was long and bright, the walls lined with portraits of judges past, solemn faces cast in oil. Gazing down through the decades of precedent, Ava paused at the last portrait, studying its gilded frame. Dust had gathered in the corners. The paint around the judge's eyes had begun to crack. Then she turned away, her reflection disappearing into the glass doors ahead. Behind her, the flag still hung, unmoving, heavy with meaning, hollow with use. The courtroom was darker today. Rain pressed against the tall windows, turning the outside world into a wash of blurred silhouettes. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a steady artificial pulse that seemed to mark time itself as evidence. At the defense table, Ava Sinclair sat perfectly still. Her back was straight, her hands folded neatly on the table before her. The air around her was dense with waiting, a silence that carried the weight of withheld truth at the far end. Officer Mark Halden adjusted his uniform again. The small habitual gesture betrayed nerves he refused to show. He sat with his spine locked, his mouth a tight line, his eyes flicking between his attorney and the monitor in front of the bench. The screen was already on, its blue standby light casting a faint glow across the polished wood. Judge Byron Cale leaned forward slightly. Proceed, Ms. Ruiz. Dana Ruiz stood. Her posture was calm, deliberate, a conductor preparing the orchestra. Her dark suit was simple, her expression surgical. She spoke with restraint. The way surgeons make incisions, not to wound, but to expose. Your Honor, with permission. The defense would like to revisit the footage entered as Exhibit 7A. We believe certain details were overlooked in prior review. Kesner composed, confident, gave a polite shrug. No objection, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Proceed. Ruiz lifted the remote from the table, her thumb resting lightly on the play button. The small click echoed faintly in the chamber, a sound barely audible, yet electric in its precision. The video began. Ava's car appeared on screen. Bathed in the cruiser's flashing red-blue light, rain streaked across the lens, distorting the scene into movement and color. Holden's voice filled the room, firm, commanding, distant. Ma'am, step out of the vehicle. Ava, visible through the windshield, didn't move. The rain hammered louder. Ma'am, now. Ruiz paused the footage. The frozen frame caught Holden's stance mid-stride, hand near his holster. Ava's silhouette sat motionless inside the car. The courtroom, too, was motionless now. Ruiz spoke softly. Officer Holden, you testified that Ms. Sinclair appeared agitated. Would you say this frame depicts agitation? Halden leaned forward slightly, squinting at the screen. It's hard to tell. She looks tense. Stillness equals tension. Context matters. Ruiz nodded once. Agreed. Let's provide context. She pressed play. Holden's voice again. Hands where I can see them. Ava's figure shifted, hands rising slowly into view. Ruiz paused again. Her voice stayed calm. Officer, you stated under oath that Ms. Sinclair refused to show her hands. What do you see now? Holden hesitated. It's unclear when that occurred. Ruiz turned her gaze toward the judge, not Halden. Unclear. She let the word rest, letting its hollowness fill the room. Then she played the next segment. Holden approached the driver's side. The sound of rain against the cruiser mixed with static. His flashlight beam flared across the screen, bleaching it white for a moment. Then, faintly, Ava's voice, calm, level. Sir, please don't raise your weapon. Ruiz froze the frame again. The silence in the courtroom thickened. Even Kesner, who had been reviewing notes, looked up. Ruiz's tone remained neutral. Officer, do you recall this statement? Holden's jaw shifted. No, ma'am. The audio's distorted. Could be interference? Could be. Ruiz's words cut like glass. Yet the voice seems quite clear. She rewound 3 seconds, played it again. Sir, please don't raise your weapon. Then paused once more. The line echoed through the speakers, soft but unmissable, not defiance, but restraint. A soldier's voice. A warning given without fear. Ruiz set the remote on the table. Your Honor, the defense asserts that what we are hearing contradicts both the report and the sworn testimony provided by Officer Halden. Judge Cale leaned back, adjusting his glasses. His expression was unreadable. Continue. The next portion of footage showed Halden moving in close. The lens blurred again, rain and light colliding. The only movement visible was the flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. Ruiz slowed the playback. Officer, you testified, the defendant stepped toward you, correct? Yes. Let's examine that. Frame by frame, the motion unfolded, Holden stepping forward, not her. The camera angle made it unmistakable, his body closing the distance, his hand already reaching for her arm before she even shifted in her seat. Quiet ripple moved through the room. The faintest sound of realization. Ruiz's tone remained steady, professional. So, to clarify, this is you stepping toward Ms. Sinclair. Holden's throat worked. It appears that way, yes. No further elaboration. He didn't answer. Ruiz hit pause again. The image froze mid-grain. A flicker of lightning outside the car, illuminating both faces for a split second, his expression tense. Hers unreadable. The defense notes, Ruiz said, addressing the court, that in this frame, Ms. Sinclair's hands remain visible, her movements non-aggressive, and her tone consistent. Officer Halden's approach, however, shows escalation initiated by the officer, not the defendant. The judge's pen scratched lightly across his notepad. Ruiz continued, quieter now, a voice drawing power from calm precision. This footage, Your Honor, is the only impartial witness in this room. It cannot be trained. It cannot be coached. It records without fear. She pressed play one last time. The footage ran to the end, the moment Halden grabbed her arm. The brief struggle, the camera jolting. The lens caught a glimpse of the ground, the rain, the sound of metal on asphalt. Then, static. When it ended, Ruiz turned the monitor off. The room felt suddenly emptier without its glow. Silence expanded in every direction. A silence thick with realization, the kind that lingers when lies begin to collapse under their own weight. Ruiz stepped forward. Officer, I have one final question. Holden's eyes followed her, wary. Is there any point in this recording where Ms. Sinclair raises her voice, strikes you, or otherwise exhibits aggression? He hesitated. No, ma'am. No further questions. She sat down. The judge leaned back again, exhaling slowly. The sound was almost human. His gaze drifted to the inactive monitor, black screen, faint reflection of the flag behind him. For a moment, even he seemed aware of the irony. Justice illuminated only when the lights were dimmed. Kestner rose hesitantly. Redirect, Your Honor. He waved a hand. Later. His voice had changed, softer, uncertain. Court will recess for 15 minutes. The gavel struck once, dull and hesitant. People began to stand, whispering. The clerk gathered papers. The bailiff moved toward the door. But the tension didn't dissipate. It hung in the air like fog that refused to lift. Ava remained seated. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture did a microscopic shift. The faint release of a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Ruiz turned to her. They saw it, she whispered. Ava nodded. They did. No triumph, no smile. Just acknowledgement. Across the room, Holden sat staring at the blank monitor. The reflection of the flag shimmered faintly in its dark glass, motionless, suspended, as if caught in judgment. The system had blinked briefly, involuntarily, and in that flicker of truth, the room had remembered what justice was supposed to feel like. When the courtroom reconvened, the air carried a new kind of tension, thinner, sharper, the silence before a controlled detonation. The rain had stopped, but its echo remained. Drops still clung to the tall windows, refracting the afternoon light into fractured prisms that fell across the benches and desks. Everything seemed cleaner but colder, as if the storm had rinsed the city and left behind only truth. Ava Sinclair sat at the defense table. The same position, the same composure. Her stillness was its own command. Across from her, Mark Halden sat rigid, his hands folded too tightly. The neat precision of his uniform could not hide the small tremor in his thumb. The footage had rattled him. The quiet disbelief of the spectators had finished the work. When Judge Cale returned, his robe moved like a curtain closing on an act whose ending he hadn't predicted. He adjusted his glasses, eyes flicking toward Ruiz. Counsel, you may proceed. Dana Ruiz rose. She didn't hurry. She arranged her notes, exhaled once, and began walking toward the center of the room. Her heels struck the tile with a steady rhythm, deliberate, unflinching. Your Honor, she began, her tone crisp. Before we move forward with closing statements, the defense requests the court's acknowledgement of supplemental background information regarding the defendant. Kestner frowned. Objection. Relevance. The charges are procedural. The defendant's background is not. Ruiz didn't even glance at her. It is directly relevant to credibility, Your Honor. Both the officer's perception and the prosecution's characterization depend on who the defendant is. And, more importantly, she turned, her voice deepening into calm authority. What she has already done for this country. The room stilled. Judge Cale studied her for a moment, expression unreadable. Proceed carefully, Ms. Ruiz. Ruiz nodded. Of course. She turned toward the courtroom. The defense submits into record the official military service file of Lieutenant Commander Ava Sinclair, United States Navy. A ripple moved through the spectators' benches. Chairs creaked. Someone whispered, too loudly, Navy. Ruiz laid a sealed envelope on the clerk's desk. The paper looked ordinary, but the gold seal of the Department of Defense glimmered faintly under the lights. Your Honor, with permission, I'll summarize the unclassified portions. Granted. Ruiz unfolded a single sheet, her voice steady but carrying something beneath it, reverence, maybe sorrow. Lieutenant Commander Ava Sinclair served 12 years active duty in the United States Navy, 8 of those with the Special Operations. Command Unit SEAL Team 7. Deployments include Somalia, the Gulf, and classified operations in Eastern Europe. Commendations include 2 Navy Crosses, 1 Silver Star, and the Defense Distinguished Service Medal. The air changed. Not with noise, but with its absence. Even the lights seemed to hum quieter. Halden blinked once, slowly. His hand lowered from his chin. Ruiz continued, her voice unwavering. She was honorably discharged with distinction. She trained hundreds of service members in combat ethics, compliance, and de-escalation protocol. Her record shows no disciplinary action. No infractions. No misconduct. The judge leaned back in his chair, his pen unmoving. Ruiz paused, letting the silence breathe. Then, the defendant you've called, non-compliant, aggressive, dangerous. She turned toward Halden. This woman has neutralized armed combatants in war zones with less force than the restraint she showed that night. The sentence landed like a verdict. A murmur rippled through the audience, quiet disbelief. Quiet shame. Holden's face had gone pale. His mouth opened, closed. As if there were words he might reach for, but couldn't find. Ruiz stepped closer to the defense table. Her hand rested lightly on a black folder, Eva's file. She didn't resist. She remembered her training. The training that taught her not to escalate, not to meet threat with threat. The same discipline the system has now turned against her. Ava didn't move. Her eyes stayed forward. Fixed on the seal above the judge, the same emblem she'd sworn to serve under. The same authority now judging her. Ruiz lifted one final document. This insignia, she said, unfolding a small photo of a gold trident pinned to a uniform. It isn't decoration. It's earned through years of silence, endurance, and sacrifice. It's the mark of someone trusted with the nation's darkest truths. And yet, here she sits, treated as an enemy within her own borders. She placed the image on the table before the judge. No one spoke. Even Kesner's protest had withered before it formed. Judge Cale removed his glasses. He didn't clean them. He just held them loosely in his hand. His eyes lingered on the photo for a long time, the gleam of the trident catching the courtroom. Light like a blade, Holden shifted in his chair, breaking the silence with the soft rasp of fabric. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. I didn't know. Ruiz turned her gaze to him, calm, precise. No, officer. You didn't. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Across the courtroom, a spectator exhaled, a sound more emotional than applause. It cut through the stillness like release. Ava finally moved. Not much, just her hands unfolding, fingers resting flat on the table. A quiet assertion of presence. Her face betrayed nothing, but her eyes clear. Unblinking seemed to hold both sorrow and command. The silence after was total. The kind that demands witness. Judge Cale cleared his throat, but the sound faltered. The court acknowledges the record, he said finally. Proceed at counsel's discretion. Ruiz nodded. No further argument, Your Honor. The judge gestured faintly. Understood. Court will reconvene tomorrow for disposition. The gavel struck, but it sounded different now, hollow, hesitant. As people began to rise, no one spoke above a whisper. The usual rustle of procedure, chairs scraping, papers shuffled, seemed muted, as though even the walls had absorbed the weight of revelation. Halden stood slowly. His gaze drifted toward Ava, then dropped. For a brief moment, the officer and the soldier existed in the same silence. One built from ignorance, the other from restraint. Ava rose. Her posture unchanged, her eyes fixed ahead. The bailiff opened the door, and light from the corridor spilled into the dim room, catching the insignia photograph still lying on the judge's desk. The gold trident glowed faintly, then dulled again as the door closed behind her. In the empty courtroom, the flag behind the bench hung motionless, its colors, vivid and proud, now reflected faintly in the black screen of the monitor. The same one that had revealed the truth, honor, authority, silence. All of them now indistinguishable in the room's still air, a reckoning without applause. The conference room had no windows. It was the kind of room designed for briefings, not truth, rectangular, sterile. Humming under the flat buzz of fluorescent lights, the air smelled faintly of coffee, toner, and the cold metallic temps of the HVAC system. Every surface reflected control. A long table bisected the space, dark oak laminate polished to a false sheen. Around it sat the quiet custodians of institutional survival prosecutor Mark Halden, Judge Cale, and Captain Roy Denton, the department's liaison officer, his badge glinting under the light like a reminder of jurisdiction. On the table lay a few folders, a laptop, and 3 sealed paper coffee cups, still steaming. Their lids bore faint brown rings where the liquid pressed upward against the plastic. The small pressure of heat in an otherwise cold room. Kesner broke the silence first. It's already trending. Her voice was clipped, professional. Someone leaked the sealed detail. Local bloggers picked it up. The story's gaining traction. Cale didn't look up from his folded hands. His robe was gone. In a white shirt and suspenders, he looked less judicial, more bureaucratic. How much traction? Enough, Kesner said. We'll have media requests by morning. They're calling it The Seal and the Cop. She exhaled softly through her nose, the faintest trace of irritation breaking her mask. It's a narrative we don't control yet. Captain Denton leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. We'll manage it. We've handled worse. The department's already drafting a release standard statement, procedural tone. No bias, no error, full cooperation. Kesner's eyes flicked toward him. Full cooperation with what, exactly? There's no criminal case against Halden, just optics. Denton's smile was small, dismissive. Exactly optics. Cale's fingers drummed against the table, slow, deliberate taps. We're not talking about optics. We're talking about containment. The words settled over them like a lid. Kesner took a sip of her coffee. The hearing transcript will be sealed by default, pending disposition. We can expedite the military file will remain classified. She's not likely to speak to the press. She's too disciplined for that. Still, Denton said, we can't have this turn into another headline about profiling or misconduct. We're already stretched thin on public trust. If this gets framed as systemic, he stopped, choosing his next phrase carefully. Then it becomes systemic. The irony passed unacknowledged. Kesner opened her laptop. The screen's glow tinting her face a faint blue. She scrolled through notes, bullet points, phrased in bloodless language. Incident contextualization, training refresher, interdepartmental review, words that promised everything and meant nothing. Let's keep it clean, she said. Acknowledge standard procedure was followed. Emphasize transparency, but say as little as possible. The public wants assurance, not detail. Cale leaned back. And Sinclair? Denton shrugged. Technically, she's free. Case will dissolve once the report's amended. No one's going to refile against a decorated seal. We'll frame it as mutual misunderstanding. Stress the weather conditions, low visibility, officer safety concerns. Kesner nodded slowly. A diplomatic retreat. Exactly. Silence returned, not discomfort, but calculation. The quiet rhythm of bureaucratic minds aligning. Cale broke it first. There's one problem. That footage, even if it doesn't show misconduct, it shows indifference. The public reads tone, not evidence. Kesner's voice softened into something resembling reassurance. Then we script the tone. The officer's remorse. The department's humility. The justice system's efficiency. She gave a faint, controlled smile. Remorse makes for better television than guilt. Denton laughed once, low and dry. You should have gone into PRS. She didn't answer. Cale rubbed his temple. The fluorescent light above flickered once, briefly, and steadied. We'll coordinate statements. Internal review will release a memo within 72 hours. I'll issue a sealed judicial summary. Procedural closure, no findings of misconduct. It'll read clean. He paused, but the name hers stays buried. Kesner nodded. Understood, Denton added. We'll brief Halden, keep him quiet, keep him grateful. He's already shaken. That helps. The judge's gaze lifted, cold and unwavering. Make sure he understands that gratitude is compliance. Another silence followed, heavier this time. The kind that grew roots. The coffee cups had cooled by now, their steam thinning into nothing. Kesner closed her laptop with a soft click. If we move fast, this will be forgotten in a week. She'll go back to wherever she came from. The officer will finish his term, and the narrative will normalize. Cale's eyes narrowed slightly. Normalize what, exactly? Kesner met his gaze. Everything. It wasn't defiance, only honesty. Denton stood, smoothing his uniform. Then that's our consensus. Optics, containment, trust. Same as always. Cale didn't rise. Same as always, he repeated quietly, as though testing the weight of it. The liaison left first. His boots thudded once against the tile, and then faded down the corridor. Kesner gathered her folders next, efficient, silent. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving only the hum of the ceiling vent and the faint ticking of Cale's wristwatch. For a moment, the judge sat alone. The table stretched before him like a runway for decisions already made. He looked at the empty coffee cups, the faint condensation rings they'd left brief evidence of heat, already evaporated. He exhaled slowly, the sound lost in the Then he gathered the papers, slid them into a manila envelope, and sealed it with a strip of tape. The sound of it, adhesive tearing from its backing, was loud in the silence. When he stood, his chair rolled slightly backward, squealing on the polished floor. He straightened his tie, adjusted his cuffs, and reached for the envelope. His hand hesitated for just a fraction of a second, not enough to change anything, only enough to mark the moment where conscience had briefly tried to surface. Then he left the room. The door closed softly, leaving behind nothing but the ticking clock and the faint scent of coffee cooling in paper cups. Outside, the courthouse lights dimmed as night reclaimed the city. But inside, under the glow of artificial certainty, the system settled once more into its rhythm, clean, controlled, unchallenged. The battlefield had been paper. The victory was silence. It began, as most modern scandals did, with an image. A single photograph, cropped, reposted, stripped of origin, pulsed through the circuitry of the internet like a heartbeat. Ava Sinclair, in full Navy uniform. Jaw set. Eyes forward. The medals at her chest glinting faintly under a light source long forgotten. Within hours, her name was everywhere. Lieutenant Commander, accused in traffic stop incident. Decorated SEAL wrongly detained. Officer misjudges war hero. Each headline spoke with certainty, though none shared the same truth. In a newsroom across the Potomac, monitors glowed in a dim sea of half-empty coffee cups and rolling headlines. The air smelled of caffeine and urgency. Journalists leaned forward in their chairs, tapping fast, trading speculation for fact at the speed of outrage. A producer muttered, "Who leaked her service record?" No one answered. They didn't need to. Some leaks weren't accidents. Some were pressure valves disguised as justice. On one screen, a newscaster's voice cut through static. Sources confirm the woman at the center of the alleged altercation is Lieutenant Commander Ava Sinclair, a highly decorated member of the U.S. Navy SEALs. The department has released a brief statement calling for patience as an internal review is underway. The footage replayed on a loop, the blurry night scene, the rain streaking the bodycam lens, the frozen frame where Ava's silhouette stood still in the glare. Online, that image was dissected frame by frame. Every pixel became an argument. In one thread, users demanded justice. In another, they demanded obedience. Some called her a hero. Others, a threat. No one called her a person. Screens across the country glowed in dark rooms in dormitories, break rooms, living rooms, each one reflecting judgment. Her stillness, her silence, her restraint were reinterpreted as defiance, arrogance, composure, guilt. Every observer saw what they needed to believe. Truth became participatory. On social media, someone posted her commendations. She's fought for a flag that won't fight for her. Underneath, another comment read, rank doesn't put you above the law. Below that, an ad for athletic wear appeared automatically. Algorithmic indifference at work by afternoon. The clip had been viewed 3 million times. The narrative fractured into tribes. Hashtag Justice Forever trended beside hashtag Back the Blue. Both claimed moral clarity. Both fed the machine. At the precinct, Officer Halden watched it unfold from the breakroom TV. The sound was low, but the captions ran in sharp white text across the screen. He sat hunched, elbows on his knees, his untouched lunch beside him. The footage paused on Ava's face again, her expression unreadable. Halden muttered, almost to himself, that's not how it was. But even he didn't sound sure anymore. A fellow officer passed behind him, shaking his head. They'll chew you up, man. Then they'll move on. Don't read the comments. Halden didn't reply. He watched his own name scroll across the ticker. Officer involved identified as Mark Halden, 3 years of service. A grainy photo of him in uniform flashed beside Ava's side by side. Equal in frame, unequal in power. He reached forward and clicked the screen off. The silence that followed was worse. Across town, in her apartment, Ava sat in the dark. The glow of her laptop illuminated the folded uniform still lying on the chair. Her face appeared in thumbnail after thumbnail, uniformed, solemn, dissected by strangers. One headline caught her eye. Lieutenant Commander silent amid controversy. She almost laughed. Silence had been her only weapon, the only thing the system hadn't yet rewritten. The phone vibrated again. Unknown number. She didn't answer. The television in the background murmured through another segment. A commentator's voice rose with performative gravity. This raises important questions about how we perceive authority, about training, about perception of threat. Ava closed the laptop. The room went black. Only the faint city light crept through the blinds, fractured. Restless. In the newsroom, Kessner's official statement hit the wire. The department remains committed to transparency and accountability. We ask the public to reserve judgment until the review is complete. It was the language of containment, polished, denatured, precise. Editors read it aloud, adjusted nothing, and published by midnight. Pundits debated her posture, her tone, her silence. Analysts replayed the same 8 seconds of footage with diagrams and color-coded arrows, as if truth could be found in the geometry of rain. In a bar off Pennsylvania Avenue, televisions blared the same segment over muted music. Patrons drank, commented, shrugged. War hero or not, she should have complied. Doesn't matter. They always rewrite it later. It's not news, it's narrative. The bartender wiped a glass clean, said nothing. The repetition dulled everything, the outrage, the empathy, the point. By morning, the first opinion pieces appeared, the thin line between respect and resistance. When heroes become suspects, the weaponization of silence. Each carried authority, none carried truth. On the streets, posters began to appear, her image half-toned and bold eyes shadowed by a caption, "Know her name." Someone had printed it overnight. Someone else had already torn it down. In a government office, a staffer scrolled past the coverage and muttered, "She's a headline, not a case. Give it 48 hours. He wasn't wrong." The internet's memory was long, but its attention was short. By nightfall, the cycle had turned inward. Commenters began dissecting each other instead of her. Threads decayed into noise. Outrage became fatigue. The story hadn't ended, it had simply diffused. In her apartment, Ava stood by the window. The rain had returned softer this time, tracing slow patterns on the glass. She watched the lights flicker across the wet asphalt below. The same red-blue shimmer she remembered from that night. The city breathed beneath her, restless, electric, indifferent. Somewhere across those streets, 1,000 screens still glowed with her face, her silence, her service repeated until meaning itself wore thin. Identity had become reflection. Whatever the light decided to show, and outside every window, the same cold rain kept falling, rinsing nothing away. The room was the same. Same sterile light. Same beige walls that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. The same faint smell of paper and disinfectant, as if someone had tried to scrub the place clean of what it represented. But now, Officer Mark Halden sat on the other side of the table. The blinds were drawn, sealing the room from the morning outside. A single fluorescent tube hummed above him, casting a pallid light that flattened everything it touched: his face, the paperwork before him, the metal legs of the chair that squeaked when he shifted. The internal review panel had not yet entered. There were 3 empty chairs across from him. One of them, the center one, bore a faint scuff on the back, where countless officers had leaned too far, too often. He stared at that mark, as though it held meaning. In front of him lay a black plastic rectangle, his bodycam, the same model that had blinked red on the night it all began. It sat there now, powered down, its lens dark, its small red indicator light dead. He found himself watching it anyway, waiting for it to wake. To accuse, he could hear the building around him, the muffled footsteps of clerks, the distant ringing of phones, the mechanical rhythm of printers spitting reports. The institution was alive, unbothered by his stillness. When the door opened, the sound of hinges echoed sharply. 3 figures entered: internal affairs officers, neutral expressions worn like uniforms. 2 men, 1 woman. Each carried a tablet. None greeted him. The woman sat in the center chair, the scuffed one. She spoke first, without looking up. Officer Halden, this review concerns your conduct during the incident on October 17th and your subsequent reports. You understand that this is administrative, not criminal. Yes, ma'am. Good. Let's proceed. The man to her right began typing. The sound of keys filled the space between their words. We've reviewed your written statement, the bodycam footage, and testimony from both parties. His voice was calm, almost sympathetic. There are inconsistencies we need clarified. Halden nodded once. His throat was dry. Understood. Your report described the subject as agitated, exhibiting behavior consistent with a perceived threat. He nodded again, slower this time. Yes. The woman raised her eyes. Do you still stand by that assessment? The room seemed to tighten. The hum of the light grew louder. Or maybe his ears just picked it up more clearly now. I believed she might become aggressive, he said carefully. Given her demeanor, the silence, the lack of compliance. And yet, the second man said, scrolling on his tablet, the footage shows no aggression. No verbal escalation. She stood still, answered when prompted, followed your instructions. Calmly, I misread it. The woman's eyebrow lifted slightly. You misread silence. He looked down at his hands. Yes, ma'am. A pause. The air thickened. The woman leaned forward slightly. Do you understand the consequence of that misreading? Halden's throat tightened. He could still hear the rain, even now the hollow rhythm on metal. The distorted reflection of red-blue lights across wet asphalt. He had told the story enough times that it had almost become true to him. Almost I do, he said quietly. Good, she replied, tone cool as glass, because the department now does too. The statement hung there. Not accusation, not empathy, just procedure. The officer on the right resumed typing. The rhythmic clatter punctuated every silence. Halden looked at the empty chair. Beside him, the one meant for legal counsel. He had chosen not to bring anyone. It seemed cleaner that way, more honest. But now, staring at the hollow space, it looked like the outline of something missing, accountability perhaps, or understanding. The woman continued. Officer Halden, your service record shows no prior incidents. You've been with us 3 years. This review isn't about vilifying. It's about pattern recognition, about institutional response. He knew what that meant. They weren't interested in him, not really. They were interested in precedent. His name was now a buffer between the system and scrutiny. Effective immediately, she said. "You are placed on administrative leave, pending final disposition. Departmental review will determine whether retraining or termination is appropriate." He nodded again. The gesture felt mechanical. The man on the left spoke. Voice almost kind. "You'll surrender your service weapon and badge before leaving the building. Bodycam will remain as evidence." Holden's eyes flicked toward it, the lifeless black device, still sitting between them like a witness. Its red light blinked once suddenly, a glitch, a memory of power. He flinched before realizing it was only a reflection from the overhead lamp. The woman closed her folder. "You may submit a written statement if you wish to appeal. That's all." The panel stood. No handshakes. No farewells. Just the scrape of chairs and the click of the door shutting behind them. For a moment, the room seemed to exhale. The hum returned to its usual rhythm, steady, indifferent. Halden sat still. The bodycam remained on the table, its small glass eyes staring upward. The same device that had once granted him authority. Now recording nothing but his silence. He thought of that night, the rain, the glare, the calm face in front of him. He had mistaken composure for threat, silence for defiance. The training manual hadn't warned him about dignity. He rose slowly, picking up his cap from the table. It felt heavier than usual. When he stepped into the hallway, the world was bright again. Too bright. Fluorescent white bled into sunlight through the corridor's end window. The same corridor where he'd once walked out after writing his report, confident and clean. Now, every sound, the clicking heels, the shuffling papers, the low murmur of officers behind glass doors, seemed to form one repeated phrase. "You are the story now." He passed the records office. A clerk he didn't know looked up, then away. Conversations stopped as he walked by. The department moved on, but slower. Like a machine catching its own reflection for the first time. At the security desk, he placed his sidearm into a tray. Then the badge. The officer collecting them didn't speak. Just nodded, and sealed them in a labeled envelope. Name. Halden got it. The man scribbled something on a form, and handed him a receipt, thin paper. Temporary proof of identity. Halden turned it over once in his hand. His name looked different when written in ink that wasn't his own. As he left the building. The glass doors reflected him back, a uniformed man without a badge, a symbol stripped of purpose. Outside, the sun burned through a veil of cloud. Blinding for a moment, he stopped on the steps, blinking against the light. In his mind, the red flash of the bodycam returned, not as command, but as warning. Behind him, the doors shut automatically. The echo lingered, soft but final. He started down the steps, the sound of his boots, rhythmic and lonely. The city stretched before him, unbothered, still humming. Somewhere, people were still arguing online, dissecting what had happened. Revising truth into comfort. But here, in the glare of noon, there were no screens, no headlines. Only the silence of consequence. And as he walked, the memory of the red light pulsed faintly in his mind. Once, a signal of authority, now a beacon of everything he had failed to see. The wind at the naval base carried the scent of salt and oil, clean and mechanical at once. The gates opened with a slow hydraulic sigh, and Lieutenant Commander Ava Sinclair stepped through in uniform. For the first time in weeks, she wore it publicly. The weight of it sat differently now, no longer armor, but memory. The guards at the gate saluted as she passed. She returned it, crisp, measured. The sound of her boots on the concrete walkway echoed softly between hangars and low administrative buildings. The world here was exact. Planes gleamed, flags hung taut, and every motion carried order. Yet beneath that precision was something quieter, almost mournful, a kind of institutional breathing, steady but tired. Inside the main corridor, the air was cooler. Fluorescent lights stretched in perfect alignment, casting a sterile sheen over glass display cases that lined the hallway. Medals, photographs, folded flags, fragments of history, curated to look like purpose. The floor gleamed enough to catch reflections, and for a moment, Ava's shadow mingled with the ghosts of others who had walked this path before her. A portrait hung near the entrance, a commander in dress whites, eyes forward, jaw set. Beneath it, A small brass plate reads service is its own proof. Ava stopped. The words caught her more than the image. She studied the reflection of her own face in the glass, the faint distortion bending her features. It was like looking at herself through history's expectations. Loyal, silent, contained. Lieutenant Commander Sinclair, a voice called softly behind her. She turned. Commander Reeves, her superior, stood at the end of the hall, tall, composed. The kind of man who had long ago mastered the tone of formal empathy. Sir, he nodded once. You're cleared for reassignment. Headquarters signed off this morning. We'll brief at 1600. Yes, sir. A pause lingered. Reeves's eyes moved toward the wall of medals. You handled yourself well. The department's been in contact. Informal apologies, of course. Understood. They've requested you make no public statement. For everyone's sake. I wasn't planning to. Reeves studied her face for a moment longer, searching for something: defiance, resentment, emotion, but found only stillness. That might be for the best, he said finally. Ava inclined her head. Permission to resume duties, sir. He hesitated, as though caught between command and conscience. Granted, she saluted. He returned it, slower than protocol required, heavier somehow, and turned away down the corridor. Alone again, Ava continued walking. Her reflection moved beside her in the display glass, a parallel self, uniformed and silent. In one case, a folded flag rested on a velvet base, its stars facing outward. Beside it, a small placard read "For those who returned, changed." She stopped once more. The reflection of the flag overlapped her chest, the stars shimmering faintly across the medals she'd earned. The glass separated them, like two versions of loyalty divided by transparency. Further down, the corridor opened into the operations wing. Young officers moved briskly through, conversations clipped, respectful. A few slowed when they saw her. Recognition flickered, not from fame, but from rumor. They saluted. Ava returned each one with precision, her face composed, her body upright. But the gestures, repeated and multiplied, began to feel heavier. Not celebratory, not even deferential, they were acknowledgments of something they didn't fully understand. In the briefing room, her desk awaited a simple metal surface, untouched since she'd last sat there. The papers remained where she'd left them, an after-action report half-written, a note in her own handwriting at the top margin. The mission is never over. She sat down. The chair creaked softly beneath her. The sound was small but grounding. She reached for the pen beside the report, but didn't write. The line she'd already written was enough. A knock came at the door. Chief Petty Officer Dalton, one of her former trainees, stood there, posture formal, eyes uneasy. "Ma'am," he said. "It's good to have you back." She nodded. "Thank you, Chief." He hesitated, then added quietly, "We saw it all. The coverage, the footage, some of us. We didn't know what to say. There's nothing to say." He nodded, unsure. "Still, you handled it better than any of us could have." Ava looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "That's the problem, isn't it?" He blinked, not sure if she wanted an answer. She saved him the trouble by turning slightly toward the window. "Carry on, Chief." "Yes, ma'am." The door closed. Outside the window, the sea stretched wide and silent. The horizon line was razor clean, one of those rare days when sky and water refuse to blend. Ava's gaze followed that line until it blurred, her reflection caught again in the glass, faint, overlapping with the sky. It was not the reflection of a victim or a hero. Only a person who had learned that truth inside institutions was rarely visible. Only refracted. When the time came for the briefing, she rose and crossed the hallway once more. Officers parted as she passed. Whispers followed, but died quickly, replaced by the rhythm of boots, orders, and engines. At the end of the corridor, just before turning the corner, she paused one final time before the display of service medals. Her reflection met hers again to Ava's, one behind glass, one in motion. She raised her hand in a slow, deliberate salute. It wasn't for the flag, or the portraits, or the system that had chosen silence over truth. It was for the discipline that had held her upright when everything else demanded collapse. For the dignity she refused to let the world define for her. The salute lingered for a full 3 seconds longer than required, long enough to reclaim meaning from ritual. Then she lowered her hand. The corridor lights hummed overhead, steady and cold. The air smelled faintly of polish and salt. Behind her, the reflection remained, her figure half-shadowed in the glass, surrounded by metals that gleamed without warmth. Justice had been served, perhaps, but it had not healed. She walked away, her footsteps even, precise. The sound fading into the mechanical pulse of the bass, one life folded back into the rhythm of duty. One truth buried within the architecture of loyalty. And as the door at the corridor's end closed behind her, her reflection disappeared, leaving only the quiet gleam of metals behind the glass, symbols waiting for the next name to make them mean something again. Morning broke slowly over Washington, the kind of pale, reluctant light that seemed to hesitate before touching the monuments. The air along the Potomac was cold and clear, the water carrying faint ribbons of mist that dissolved in the rising sun. On the jogging path near Arlington Bridge, Lieutenant Commander Ava Sinclair ran alone. Her pace was even, her breath controlled, measured, like everything she did. The city was waking in fragments, the distant hum of traffic, the whine of an early train, the hollow thud of construction echoing from somewhere across the river. Each sound folded into the rhythm of her stride. The world, unchanged dot behind her. The courthouse still stood, its marble facade gleaming clean under the morning light. As if it had never witnessed the trial, the lies, or the silence that had filled its walls. The building was timeless by design, meant to outlast scandal, to wear justice like an architectural illusion. Inside that courthouse, in the records department, a file sat sealed under procedural order, Sinclair v. Halden. The documents had been archived neatly, catalogued by number and date, buried beneath layers of formality. The system had no memory, only storage. Months had passed since the verdict. At the precinct, Officer Mark Halden sat in a training room lined with posters about community trust and de-escalation techniques. The slogans glowed faintly under the same sterile lights that had once flickered above his report desk. A supervisor stood before a whiteboard, delivering the morning briefing. "We're updating language on field reports," she said. "Use of subjective descriptors, like non-compliant or aggressive, will require additional justification. Review the news section under Policy 7.14 before the end of shift." She spoke quickly, efficiently, the tone of someone fulfilling a requirement. No names were mentioned. No reference to the case that had triggered the revision. Halden sat still, a pen between his fingers, his notebook open to a blank page. The tip of the pen hovered, but didn't move. Around him, the other officers scribbled dutifully, their pens scratching in unison. The supervisor continued, "Remember, language defines perception. Perception defines liability." A few officers exchanged glances, faint smirks of cynicism. Someone muttered, "Guess we're writing poetry now." Quiet laughter rippled through the room. Halden didn't join in. His eyes drifted toward the far corner, where the training camera's red light blinked steadily, the same pulse as a bodycam. The same unblinking eye that had once felt like protection. Now, it watched him differently. When the meeting ended, he remained seated. The room emptied around him, the shuffle of boots fading into the hallway. The whiteboard still read, "Professionalism equals control." The equation looked false. He clicked his pen once, the sound sharp in the empty space, then closed his notebook without writing a word. At headquarters, the department's Public Affairs Division finalized a brief memo. It was to be sent to select outlets, phrased carefully. The Metropolitan Police Department continues its ongoing commitment to community accountability and officer training reform. Internal reviews have resulted in procedural updates aimed at strengthening mutual trust between officers and civilians. No mention of Ava, no mention of error. Only updates. Only commitment. The memo was signed, approved, and released. By afternoon, it appeared in small boxes at the bottom of local news sites, read by few, forgotten by most. Elsewhere, the rhythm of the city continued, paperwork processed, hearings scheduled, patrol cars dispatched. The hum of bureaucracy was constant, a kind of civic tinnitus that never faded. And yet, somewhere within that noise, something had shifted, invisible but real, like a breath held differently. On the river path, Ava slowed to a jog, then stopped near the edge of the water. She bent slightly, hands on her knees, breath misting in the cold air. The Potomac moved steadily below, indifferent and patient. The surface rippled under the early sunlight, reflecting fragments of gold and steel. She straightened, gazing across the water toward the Lincoln Memorial, its white columns glowing faintly, perfect from afar. The river between them looked peaceful, but she knew how fast it could turn undercurrent. A group of runners passed her, their footsteps rhythmic, their conversation light. None recognized her. To them, she was just another morning body in motion, anonymous, unremarkable, free. She preferred it that way. Ava adjusted her breathing, eyes following the river's curve as it disappeared around the bend, slipping past the monuments and bridges. Somewhere down that current, the courthouse stood. Further still, the precinct. Buildings unchanged, but faintly touched by what had happened, like glass fogged by breath. She began running again. Her body moved with mechanical precision, but her mind drifted elsewhere to the hearing room. The silence after the verdict, the click of the bodycam light, red, then black dot. She remembered Halden's face in those final moments. Not hatred, not even shame, but confusion. The kind that comes when a story you've built around yourself begins to collapse. Forgiveness wasn't part of her discipline. She didn't need it. The system had always been larger than any single man. What mattered was exposure. Not enough to change it, but enough to make it flinch. The path curved inland, tracing the park perimeter where joggers, cyclists, and commuters intersected in silent choreography. The city's pulse was accelerating, horns, voices, the faint roar of engines, as she ran. Sunlight began to cut through the haze. It touched the tops of buildings, the reflective windows of government offices, the polished domes and antennas. Morning light, relentless, impartial. It revealed everything but redeemed nothing. At the same hour, inside the academy, new recruits sat through their orientation lecture. The instructor, an aging sergeant, spoke in practiced cadence. You'll see footage from last year's incident during your ethics module. Pay attention. It's not about fault, it's about perception. Every frame tells two stories. The recruits nodded, eyes dutiful, pens poised. None would remember her name. Only the footage. Only the cautionary tale. That instructor clicked the projector. The bodycam footage began to play. Rain, headlights, command shouted into darkness. The pause before escalation. The voice, calm but misread. Notice her hands, the instructor said. Notice his tone. The room was silent. A few recruits shifted uneasily. Every decision lives here. He tapped his temple. Before it lives here, he touched the holster on his belt. The video froze on a frame. Ava's stillness caught in red-blue glare. The same image that had circled the world. The same misunderstanding, preserved like evidence of something deeper. The screen went dark. On the riverbank, Ava reached the bridge again. The city was fully awake now, sunlight glancing off windshields, flags unfurling, the sound of distant sirens threading through the morning air. She stopped, turned toward the water once more. It shimmered, endless and indifferent, carrying reflection after reflection downstream, monuments, bridges, fragments of sky. Everything moved. Nothing stayed. She stood still, watching. Her breath steadied, slow and deliberate. Somewhere far behind her, the institutions hummed to life. Keyboards clattering, printers warming, doors unlocking. The system had endured, as it always did. But endurance was not victory. Ava began to run again, the rhythm of her steps folding into the city's pulse. The light grew sharper, spreading across the water like a quiet revelation, not redemption, but persistence. Each stride was small, precise, an unstoppable. And as the morning widened into day, the river carried her reflection forward, broken by ripples, remade by motion, a solitary figure moving through a nation that refused to change, yet could no longer pretend it hadn't been seen.